Here's an idea. Brands are mythological. Where at one point it felt like we had companies which just sold products that maybe aligned with some purpose or design, now we have the much more complicated and nebulous concept of the brand. Which is not to say that we haven't had the brand in some form or another for a while. It's named after the incredibly old practice of literally burning one's mark into their products. It's just to say that, like vinyl records or Bill Murray, brands have taken on new meaning as of late. Usually associated with businesses, though often with people, modern brands are often conjured by visual markers or physical products, but in total they stand for something more, a cross between personality, design, and purpose. And a brand may be abstract, but that doesn't mean that it's not valuable. Often a brand is the most valuable thing an entity possesses. It's sort of like their reputation combined with persona, a persoputation, or a repusona. My personal brand involves making dad jokes before smash cuts. An organization's brand precedes it. PBS and the BBC take their brands very seriously, as do Coca-Cola and automobile manufacturers, luxury ones especially. People even have recognizable personal brands. Bill Murray has a great one. Stephen Colbert's is not only strong, but currently undergoing a very interesting transition. Beyoncé has arguably the greatest personal brand of all time. Smash cut. The thing I wonder about brands is how they function in our culture. What do they do? They help sell things, sure. They help guide our expectations and decision-making processes, and in many situations they allow us to construct ourselves. The clothing we wear, the technology we use, most of it is branded, even if non-explicitly, and like it or not, those brands say something about you to others. Brands are these weird, culturally dependent organizational tools which help us consume, but also help us project. They inform our assumptions and aspirations and provide a certain portion of the foundation for our social interactions. What's on your beer label, what's on your shirt label, what logo is on your phone, your sports team's favorite band's console of choice. All of these things connect to stories constructed by entities in the hopes that you will align with them, with their brand. In a weird way, brands guide us. In a weirder way, they're a lot like myths. Myth? Seriously? Out of ideas, this guy. No, but really, hear me out. First, let's talk a little bit about what myths are. Classically, myths have been stories about great success or harrowing adventure, often amazing feats with impossible figures. Myths are generally not based in verifiable history, actual first-hand experience, or really even an interest in those things. A myth may or may not be true, but its relationship to truth is often one of the least interesting things about it. Myths are about relatability, even if they are also fantastical. Myths construct stories and situations which we understand to be representative or significant, to contain lessons or meaning over and above truth. Classically, myths are things like stories about the creation of the world as dreamed by a higher power or hatched from an egg. These stories stress the importance, fragility, or contingency of existence. Countless cultures have flood myths, which describe the rebirth of nature or culture after times of great excess or corruption. Joseph Campbell famously outlined the Monomyth, of which there is a practical infinity of examples. A hero goes on an adventure, meets great hardship, and overcomes it after great personal transformation. There's even mythopoesis, the creation of fictional mythology, like what happens in Lord of the Rings, Dream Theater records, or Dark Souls. This is all to say that though we may think of them mostly as being at home in dusty tomes, the myth is alive and well. Which is good, because Campbell also wrote that societies without myths don't function. The purpose of the myth is fourfold, he said: to celebrate the grand, unknown possibilities of being a living, breathing thing, to describe how our world and its context came into existence, to organize and support the function of the culture the myth belongs to, and finally, to give its audience a place within that culture, a way to understand and interact with it. You're maybe now starting to see how all of this relates to, like, Tide commercials, and why when someone cuts you off in traffic on the highway and they're driving a Corvette, you're like, oh.
Yep, knew that was coming.
But there's one more thing we have to talk about before we reach the X on this mythopoetic treasure map, and it's how myths do all of this stuff, how people construct them so they contain this kind of meaning. This is a thing our old friend Roland Barthes has some thoughts on. In Myth Today, Barthes says that anything can be a myth. Most things are not, he stipulates, but anything can be. Because myths, he says, aren't stories so much as they are languages, or really ways of talking, types of discourse. A myth, for Bart and this video, for the sake of argument, isn't so much content as it is form, not narrative, images, characters, or ideas, so much as the way those things are treated. A paradigmatic example he provides is E equals mc squared. The equation, he argues, has been mythologized. It signifies something true, sure, something that does exist, but it also hyper-signifies. It signifies over and above its own meaning. It stands for mathematicity, he says, which I think is sort of like smarts and Einstein, scientific progress, complexity, but also beautiful simplicity. In other words, E equals mc squared has a mythos. It is treated like, and so has become, a myth, which I know, it feels weird to say because we think of myths as being made up fake things. But remember, myth and fact are not mutually exclusive. That's why Snopes.com exists. Sometimes a myth is also true. Bart said that this creates a kind of hostility between the two. A myth might be true. You might be able to wring truth out of it. It may be true as long as it aligns with your outlook, or it might be totally unconcerned with whatever truth is. So there's a complex tension between myth and truth, because navigating between the two means navigating a whole complex network of things. Sort of like when you fight with your significant other about apples. The point is that things which become mythologized are emptied and then filled back up again. E equals mc squared is an equation. Beyonce is a pop star, a Corvette is a car. But through a complicated interaction with its surrounding culture, those simple meanings are shed, subdued, or transformed. Those things are then re-instilled with some greater significance beyond their original significance. Myths may be exactly what they are, a story about this or that, an equation, an object, or a person, but they're also something more. This, I think, is how brands work. They seek to, and often succeed, at subduing an object's simple existence. Jackets are no longer just jackets, toothpaste is not toothpaste, and personalities become much more than people. Axe body spray, Maybelline cosmetics, Jack Daniels, Tina Fey, Marc Maron, none of them have the content of a traditional myth, but they all have its form. All of these things, viewed as a brand or as a part of one, are freed from their simple meaning and they begin to hyper-signify. They become stories with varying relationships to the truth. Whether those stories are about talent, attitude, luxuriousness, status, success, or effectiveness, the goal is that over time you associate the thing with its story in addition to its thingness, or personness, I guess. That's how brands work. Ideally, the story is one you like, and so by extension, you like the thing. Maybe you also like the thing directly, but that'd be nice, but it matters less. It's tough to make something that you can be confident millions of people will like. It's much easier to create stories which make it seem like millions of people should like it. Just like traditional myths, sometimes that story works and has great impact, and sometimes it's just a cultural
It's better in a bacon bowl.
So here is where we can ask, so what? Brands, myths, whatever. Why does this matter? Why is it important? Well, let's go back to Joseph Campbell's function of myths. His first 2 points are a little grand for brands as myths. 1, do brands provide opportunities to discover the grand and unknown possibilities of life? I mean, if you think consumerism has replaced all manner of actual adventure in the world, you might be inclined to say yes. Yes, they do. And then sigh heavily. 2, do brands seek to explain the foundation of our existence in some way? Again, an arguable stretch. Insofar as our existence is defined by media messages and consumerism, insofar as celebrity culture could maybe be seen as some kind of idol worship, you might say yes, followed by several long drags on your cigarette as you stare deeply into your pitch black espresso thinking about the futility of all things. C'est la vie. But okay, the second 2, do brands organize and support the values and function of a culture? Do they provide the people who interact with them a place in that culture? I think the answer to these 2 questions is a definite and unequivocal yes. Brands are a part of an enormous and enormously complicated cultural feedback loop which determines the ideas that are present in a culture so that certain ones can be amplified and popularized and then fed back into that culture as products, media, personalities, news, whatever, tons of things, action figures, you name it. Is this a bad thing? Again, depends on your outlook. For what it's worth, at the VMAs, when Kanye West talked about advertising teaching our kids how to live, I think this is maybe part of what he was trying to get at. Taking lessons and meaning, things which resemble or are easily mistakable for truth, from a complex of media messages behaving or being treated as myth. And I don't know, if Kanye doesn't like it, and he didn't seem to, I'm not sure I do either. His is a brand I trust.
We're not gonna control our kids with brands.
What do you guys think? Do brands resemble myths in any way? And what other things do you think have been mythologized in modernity, which is a word that I always want to use, but also have just great self-consciousness about using. You know what I'm saying. You're picking up what I'm putting down. Let us know in the comments, and I will respond to some of them in next week's comment response video. In this week's comment response video, we talk about your thoughts regarding the Pokemon War fan theory. If you want to watch that, you can click right here or find a link in the doobly-doo. Also, 2 bits of news that are repeat bits of news. Idea Channel has a t-shirt that you can buy. You can find it at dftba.com, and at the end of this month, I'm going to be in Vienna, Austria, giving a talk at their TEDx event. So if that is in your neck of the woods, come and say hey. Links to information about both of those things in the place where the links go. You know what it's called. This week's episode was brought to you by the hard work of these living myths. We have a Facebook and IRC and a subreddit, links in the doobly-doo, and the tweet of the week comes from E103084, who points us towards Innuendo Studios' latest about cultivation theory as it relates to violence in video games. And as always, it's a great one. And hey, in case you were wondering, this episode of Idea Channel was sponsored by Dropbox. If you are designing, presenting, writing, or building, Dropbox makes it easy to work together on any file. Because hey, if you can work with anyone, anywhere, on any file, the world will surely be full of more interesting things. Dropbox. Make it yours.